Our meeting is now in session. Shh. This is a meeting of the Los Angeles City Transportation Committee. Colleagues, if it is okay with you, I'd like to have on consent items 1 through 4 and item number 9, with the change on item number 3 in the report that it takes effect in 2009, right? Item 2. I'm sorry, item 2. Okay. And sorry, Mr. Sachs, I do see your cards now. I apologize. Thank you for letting me. It was put here.
What
Yes.
do you mean by item 2? That's mine in my district.
Item 2, there was just a typo in the report that said its implementation was going to be in 2008. It's 2009. I think it's on page 2. Let me see. It is in recommendation number 3, where it says, adopt the attached resolution amending the boundaries of temporary preferences and renewing the district for 12 more months until February 3rd of 2008, it says. It should be 2009.
So in other words, it stays in place now and then...
Through 2009. They just had an error in the typo. It would have gone out of effect in another month.
So much. It's already in effect.
It's already in effect, so yes.
We don't want it inadvertently expiring.
So we do have a card on item 4 and item 9. So we will just do consent then for items 1, 2, and 3. I'd like to continue item number 7 for 2 weeks. Asked staff, they had not had a chance to brief each of the council members about some of the proposed projects, and I think both of you have been on this committee before and know that when they get here, you're all looking at your projects and want to make sure that those have been included. So they will be holding those briefings prior to 2 weeks from today. And then we want to continue item number 10 for, excuse me, for 30 days, and have asked them to come back on some of our projects. This was just the motion, so we're, in essence, adopting the motion, asking them to report back on those projects, so we're competitive in 2009. If we can, since we, on items 4 and 9, Mr. Sachs, would you like to come up and make your comments on those items? I'm sorry, Chris Murray put item number 4. You're fine, thank you, okay. Item number 9. So we'll adopt consent on item number 4 as well, since Mr. Murray is fine with that.
One's done, two's done, three's done, four's done, 7 is continued. 10 is it? Oh, they're back.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Sachs.
you.
Sorry about
Good
that.
afternoon. Thank you. Well, if it's all right with you, Mr. Groom, I'd also like to make comments on the other ones, even though you're holding them for extended period of time. I don't know if I'll make it for
You mean
those other
items
meetings.
7 and 10?
Please.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll do number 9. I basically have some questions. Who makes up the local government commission? Is it a public disclaimer for the members to, do they have to make public claims about their financial background to be on this? Who is it? And then the grant is for improved school and neighborhood pedestrian safety planning for South Los Angeles. Please tell me how you got healthy eating active communities involved. Is that like walking and chewing gum? I'm trying to, I mean, I understand the grant, because down at the bottom it says they receive $119,000 or whatever from the Caltrans grant and related matters. What are the related matters? There's, I mean, there's enough hidden in there to make it seem so obtuse that it doesn't make any sense. So I was hoping to get some kind of clarification, if that's possible.
And we can, I don't know which staff member may be here on that item to explain. I mean, this is a grant, from my understanding, we're a nonprofit, which is the organizations you mentioned. Nonprofit applied for those funds, but the funds have to come through the local government, being the city of Los Angeles.
So that would be the local.
Yes, that's
So
my
wouldn't it
understanding.
make, I mean, I don't want to get annoyed, give or take here, but doesn't it make more sense to say an agreement with the city of Los Angeles and the healthy eating active communities?
I think it's both.
Whoever
Do you
makes
wanna
that
ask a
up.
question? I think they may be 2 different organizations that coordinated this, but maybe you can,
I'm sorry,
you want to real quick explain to him.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
He was asking about what the local government commission is
Who makes it up? Who sits on it? What's the membership made up? I mean, is it different cities?
No, it's not different cities. It's a nonprofit organization.
And that's the name of the nonprofit. So should it be labeled as a nonprofit organization in the?
That's for us to determine. You could say you don't like it labeled, just ask what you want. You don't have to ask that. Tell us what you want.
I'm asking. That's what I asked.
All right, we'll have staff help you. I think we could do that for you.
Okay.
Ms. Jackson maybe could help. Okay.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on the others? Again, it's a nonprofit that applied to Caltrans, and it comes through a committee. The one thing, colleagues, that I did mention in the department was maybe this is something that there are projects in the rest of our districts as we look forward to Caltrans for others. You would put a card as well on
Yeah. Item number 7.
number 7.
I was just hoping on long-range plans for programming. There was a meeting, Move LA, a couple of weeks ago. I'd like to know that when you make a call for the programs, that you differentiate between the red line and the purple line. I believe the mayor is calling for extending the red line to the C, when it's actually the purple line that should be extended, because the purple line goes to Western Avenue, and the red line only goes to Normandy, whatever. If you're going to extend the red line, then you're talking about running a line from Hollywood to the C, because the red line doesn't go as far as the purple line. And so if you're going to get funding for the red line, then say we're going to get funding for the red line, and it's going to go from Hollywood to the C.
The purple line is the Expo line, the red line stops at Western, is it?
No, the red line doesn't go to Western. The red line goes to Normandy and then goes towards North
It
Hollywood.
goes to Vermont, but you know what? It's all semantic. There's Art Rogers. He's the guy to talk to.
I'm sorry, sir, it's not all semantic. When you get money for the red line, then why would you, the purple line goes further, so why not extend the purple line? You're duplicating the service, you're duplicating the line.
Excuse me for saying Art Rogers. It's Art Henry, and I'll come back here right now so you can get the answer, and then you're satisfied.
I'm only asking for questions to be included on the call for projects.
Mr. Sachs, well, Mr. Labange, what he's going to do is the committee's coming back on this item, so you can take his comments into consideration.
Okay, I guess I'm not going to talk about it. And then item number 10, it's taken, this is an item that's been held from the year 2005, September 2005. That's what it says, continued from 9/21/05, 11/18/05, 12/14/05, at the very top, item number 10. And now it's February, it's coming on February of 2008, you're going to hold it till March, and you want answers for 2009. What's going on for the last 4 years?
No, it's, so,
I
just so
know.
you know.
Give them
it's
back, they got the answer.
No, it's the adoption, that they adopted Safety Lou in Congress in 2005, and that we need to, we've asked for periodic reports to see, make sure, was it 2005? 2005? 2005. Make periodic, so that we meet our deadlines of 2009, so that when we go and get reauthorization, we will get more funds again. So that's why we have that. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go back to consent on, again, items 1 through 4 and item 9, continued for 2 weeks, item 7, and continued for 30 days,
So moved.
item 10. Okay. So we're going to take items 5 and 6 at the end. So if we could go just to item number 8, and then we will go back to item numbers 5 and 6.
Item number 8 is a CLA report relative to the proposed high-speed joint powers authority agreement.
Good afternoon. Ellen did all the lifting on putting this together, so she'll give you a brief presentation. We're both here to answer your questions.
The report and agreement before you is in response to a council motion from August 2006 instructing the Office of the CLA to prepare a joint powers agreement. Over the past year, the CLA has worked with the Department of Transportation, Skag, the City of Ontario, the City of West Covina, Metro, Caltrans, to draft the requested joint powers agreement. This particular JPA sets forth a 54-mile high-speed transit initial operating segment that will have stations in West LA, Union Station, West Covina, and the Ontario Airport. This is the first stage in a much larger high-speed transit system that will cover the Southern California region. This JPA is traditionally structured and is administered by a board of directors that has 8 members, 4 of which are voting members. 2 will be from the City of Los Angeles, since we have 2 stations. The other 2 will be from the cities of West Covina and the City of Ontario. The non-voting members of the board will be the public agencies mentioned before. The City of Los Angeles will be the initial director of the board, and it's a position that we will hold for 2 years. At this time, there is no financial commitment required from the City of Los Angeles, and any future financial commitments will be brought before council for approval. At the January 3rd, 2008 meeting, Skag did approve their membership in the JPA, and the cities of Ontario and West Covina are considering this matter in January as well.
And the one question I had, and I'll go to Mr. Rosendahl, because I know you pushed a lot on this particular item, is who appoints the members, the 2 members from the City of Los Angeles, and appoints which one is the chair of that?
It would be, the city council would appoint the board members for the City of Los Angeles. The board members themselves would elect the chair. And again, it stipulates that for the first term, for this 2-year period, one of the City of Los Angeles representatives will be the chair of the board.
Okay, but it will be the members of that committee that select.
Correct.
And, okay, I think, one question is, how much Skag funding is available?
At this point, very little. They have had, again, we've been working on this effort for some time. Mr. Smith has been the lead from Skag on putting this together. Skag did get some federal funding to pursue some planning efforts in this regard. Most of that money is, in fact, spent. There is some left over. So there will not be a lot of resources, but I do think it's important to put this structure in place because the impacted entities need to be at the table in discussing how it's going to proceed and how stations will be sited, and to really work out any future financial commitments that would then have to go back to their own governing boards for approval.
Yeah, a question, the biggest question obviously for me, in Los Angeles, the 2 West LA stops, where are they?
One is a Union Station, and the other is broadly defined as West Los Angeles, but has not been determined at this point. It's something that is open for discussion.
So there's one in West LA?
Yes.
Yes.
It is expected that there will be 2. As you know, Mr. Rosendahl, there was some discussion about one at LAX and then at the Veterans property, so that siting has not been, clearly in the initial operating segment, there will be 1 station. There is every expectation there will be a 2nd station in West LA. That will come with it a 2nd voting member of the board. Each station has a voting member.
I wanted 1 station to be west of the 405. That's where my area is. And if that's going to be the case, obviously, then Council District 11 should have a seat from that area, hopefully, on that board. Are we
That is the expectation, yes. And in fact, the precedent has been set. Mr. Reyes is our representative on the Blue Line or Gold Line Authority because all of those stations were in his district. Right. There is the Expo Line Authority in the east side that involves the council members with stations in their district. So our expectation is that, yes, where the council member of the area in which the station is located would be the representative.
Because right now with the Expo Line, I'm not on that, and obviously I need to get on that because we're going to end up going through my district, and I obviously need to work on that. So I'm looking forward to somehow ending up on that one for my constituents on the west side. And for this, do you have any sense of the timetable of how this would go from a JPA to reality?
This is really, I think, a very long-term project. The larger hope would be, a larger expectation is that if we can get all of the entities here, along with the harbors for goods movement involved. Orange County is working as well on a segment down there. But we would hope ultimately to drive the state system, because if we can get something moving in Southern California, our belief is it makes the north-south line high-speed rail with the state much more feasible. But again, it will be a number of years. The stations would have to be sited, funding would have to be identified. Clearly, all the environmental documents would have to be processed, the alignment, and I know there's talk about Caltrans alignment on a lot of this. So there are a lot of very complicated issues.
When you come back with that, because as Steve Hyman put a quote on old Rosendahl, he said, in my lifetime, I want to get on these different things, They said I might live to be 81, I'm 62. We'd like to get this done in timetables that will answer those kinds of questions as best as we can, as early as we can in the process, to give motivation for people like me to stay alive. Thank you. And Harpole, too. I want him to be around.
Mr. Miller, does this go to the airport? Does it go to Los Angeles International Airport?
At this point, the decision to put it there has not been finally made, but it's anticipated
Is
that
there
it
any
will.
recommendation? Does anyone have a feeling for
I believe
that?
it's in the scheduled for the next stage, that it would be included in the LAX.
And do you have any feeling on that?
Well, first of all, you know my feeling about the Green Line. The irresponsible leadership of the past killed it in '94 and left it a mile and a half in a miniature golf course from LAX. So we're in the process of resurrecting that one out of mothballs and tying it into the airport.
Well, the question is, does it go to the airport in your vision?
This one, it depends. We want to plug in the airport now. We need to figure the right configuration for all the other light rails to go in.
Well, here's the thing I just want to say. I think it should go to the airport. We should strongly do that. Why that was done, Mr. Rosendahl, is there was a RTD, Southern California RTD, and there was a South Bay councilwoman who fought hard for it and wanted to make sure it went to her district. I think we got to look at all of Los Angeles, and if you connect LAX with Ontario and regional, and if Caltrans is cooperative, I think we should look that way, but that's still to be determined. And also, I think it should be noted, if this is, I don't know if the first phase goes from Union Station, which has more infrastructure, east, as opposed to, I hope we don't get tied up, because it is 18 years that it took that metro to be built when Tom Bradley first started his push. It is 18 years from this beautiful day of where you're 62 to when you're 81, Mr. Rosendahl, if my math is correct or close. So with that being said, you have my comments. What difference is this in this other JPA for what was the orange line, or there's a Downey city councilman is on a JPA proposed for a high-speed rail authority. Is this a different one as well?
This is. There is talk of another high-speed rail alignment from Orange County, Anaheim, again to Union Station. Most recently, there's been a lot of talk about goods movement and the fact that movement from the harbor can actually make this more economically feasible.
Right.
So there's a lot to be determined, but I think that argues for establishing the JPA, because so far, Skag has done a terrific job.
Right.
But it's all been within the bailiwick of Skag, and we need a seat at the table to make these kind of decisions.
Exactly. And if there's a proposal for that JPA comes along, should we create that as well?
Well, again, we wouldn't be a party to that, because that would be an alignment at this point outside, but will we certainly be working with them? The
I'm told
intent
there's
is,
a high-speed rail that goes Santa Clarita through Los Angeles through Orange County. And you're familiar with that? And there's a councilman from Downey, I believe.
That's the Orange Line development,
Orange
which
Line.
the
is
orange.
not a JPA.
Yeah. So anyway, keep us posted on that,
will,
Jerry. I know it's
absolutely.
time, but I do strongly believe everything should go into LA International Airport. Everything should go in through to Union Station.
Thank you. So, colleagues, we have passed 1 through 4, 7, 9, 7 and 10 have been continued. 9 was also consent, and so we're on item number 8 on the JPA. Do you all have any questions, or are we ready to move on? So the order will be to adopt the CLA's recommendation for the JPA. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is City of Palmdale involved in this?
not at this juncture, no. This would be an east-west alignment out to West Covina. The north-south alignment and the issues with Palmdale are for the future.
Palmdale is in the north-south alignment?
Well, the city's been pushing that it be in the north-south alignment. Again, a lot of that is under the state high-speed rail authority. This would be a separate JPA working regionally on an east-west alignment.
As usual, okay.
Thank you very much. We'll go back, I think we'll do items 5 and 6 together.
Okay, item 5 is a DOT report relative to the recommendations to address the city's projected shortfall in the Prop A 10-year forecast, and item 6 is a DOT report relative to the fiscal year 0809 Prop C forecast.
So there's good news and bad news. I think they're going to go forward with this item, right? The one that has the summary, this document?
Yes, Jim Lefton with the Department of Transportation. I just wanted to mention firsthand that You should have two reports with you, a November 20th, 2007 report, and then a December 20th, 2007 report, which is a supplemental report which provides updated financial information. There were some actions taken at the end of November, early December by the Metro Board and the City Council that had an impact on the forecast, so we came out with a supplemental report. But you should have a summary handout that just hits some of the key issues that we wanted to address today. So if you don't mind, I'll walk you through that real quickly. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer that. Following page 2 of the handout is a chart that shows you the updated Prop A 10-year forecast, which includes all of the most recent information regarding the forecast. You can see from that chart that we are looking at a shortfall at the end of the 10-year forecast period of about $118 million. We run to an initial shortfall starting in 2010-11 of about $8.2 million. While this is significant, it's considerably better than the forecast from our November report, where we were looking at about a $212 million shortfall and a $9.6 million shortfall starting in 2009-10. So it has improved significantly, but there's still a long way to go in terms of erasing the shortfall. On page...
Can I just ask you one question?
Yes.
One thing I didn't understand is that you project something like $100 million over the 10-year period, $100 million for the good on the plan, but yet in the first couple of years, we only show a couple of million. Is that because we front-loaded some things?
The first couple of years, we're showing a surplus, is what you're saying?
We're showing that's like 10 million shortfall, but with all the changes, it drops to maybe 8 or 8.5 or something.
I think you'll see, it's because of the FAP changes. Isn't that part of the FAP changes and the grant funding?
It just didn't seem to me that we'd have that little a change early on when we're expecting 100 million over a 10-year cycle.
Well, we improved, but like I said, we were looking at a $212 million shortfall in the November report, and we're down to about $118 million.
I understand that, but if you go back to like 210, 211,
210,
you're projecting like 10, and it only dropped the shortfall like 1.5 million or something. I was just wondering why it was so small in the early years. Is that because we already have money committed?
I have to compare the...
We dropped from 10 million in the years 10 and 11 to about 8.2, but yet in 2016 to 17 we dropped almost well over 100 million.
I think, is that also because of the cost, the $140 million, which I know is to be part of citation, there's $140 million of vehicle replacement that is going to take over a period of time to replace, and it's...
And costs are also going up, too. What's reflected in this recent forecast is Commuter Express costs, which are going up about 60%.
I would have expected a more significant, that we'd realize a more positive number early on with some of those changes, instead of just a couple of $1 million difference.
Well, according to my chart from the November 20th report, in 2009-10, we were looking at a baseline of negative 9.6 million. Mm-hmm. Now we're looking at a positive 17, so there's quite a bit of turnaround even in the earlier years from last month.
What about 10 and 11? Is that, here was, I thought...
10 and 11, we were looking at a nearly $46 million shortfall. Now we're looking at only 8.2, so there's quite a bit of improvement.
All right.
So, colleagues, if I can, let Jim finish, maybe Jim finish his presentation, and then we can ask the questions, because I know you're going, updating those numbers. You're kind of taking us from, and may answer some of the questions.
And I may answer some of your questions and going through that. On page 3, it's titled, What's New? What's new from the forecast that we presented to you last year on the 06-07 forecast versus the updated 07-08 forecast? One of which is there's a lot of new revenues that we've been able to bring to the table. Last year, we were very aggressive, the department was, in going after funding to help pay for those $140 million in vehicle replacement costs. We were successful last year alone in securing about $17 million in grant funds through various sources to help buy down the cost of vehicle replacement. FAP is probably the most significant change that we had. As you know, we've been talking about FAP here for a long period of time, advocating for an increased share, and thanks to the mayor's office and Councilmember Parks and the city's representatives on the Metro Board, the FAP was changed to give the city a fair share of our FAP revenues. We estimate that'll be about $7 million a year, so that's a huge impact on the shortfall. Another issue that the board was helpful regarded the state Prop 1B bond. There's some transit capital funds that the Metro staff was initially saying we weren't eligible to receive, and we argued that we should receive a share, and the board did act to award the city a share of that funding, which should be about $10 million over the life of the bond. That's factored into the forecast. And then the council's recent actions concerning accepting Metro passes, rather discontinuing the acceptance of Metro passes starting January 1st, would have a positive impact on our revenue stream, about $1.3 million a year. So those are some examples of increased revenues that have improved the forecast since last year. There's also been some increased costs that we're using the updated 07-08 budget, which reflects generally higher costs across the board. But most notably, we recently received a proposal for the Commuter Express program, and we were here before this committee with a separate report on that issue. Commuter Express costs appear to be going up about 60% compared to what we're currently paying right now. That'll be effective February 1st. So that's about a $6 million a year increase in cost. So that's working against the revenue increases to drive the forecast higher in terms of our projected shortfall. What are the key findings based on the analysis of the 07-08 forecast on page 4 of your handout? It's significantly improved compared to last year, where again we were looking at about a $212 million shortfall by the end of the forecast period, and about a $29 million shortfall by 09-10. So things have gotten a lot better. We're still looking at about $118 million shortfall, so we still have a ways to go, and still looking at about an $8.2 million shortfall starting in fiscal year 2010-11. One of the recommendations from this report is that we postpone the implementation of 2 new dash routes that were recommended as part of our community dash need assessment study. Those routes have been included in, I think, the last 2 Prop A budgets, but were not implemented due to concerns over the impact on the shortfall. And we mentioned that in our report from August 2006. It was raised that that was an issue that the committee needed to address. If we were to continue down that path and not implement those 2 new services or any other new services that would impact the shortfall, we would expect to see the shortfall at the end of the 10-year period reduce from about $118 million to $92 million. And in a moment, I'll walk you through that table that's attached. As Councilmember Gruhl mentioned, we have to replace our fleet. We estimate that'll cost about $140 million over the next 10 years. It's a lot of money, and that's why we need to continue to be aggressive in terms of finding as much grant funding as we can to help buy down that cost. While there are no cancellation of services recommended at this point in time in our report, it is something that in the near future we may need to address. Unless a new funding source is identified, there's been a lot of talk lately about a new tax that might be considered for rail funding and other transit projects, or possibly identifying another city funding source. Prop C is one possibility, and Mike will give you an update on Prop C in a moment. The chart following page 5 of the handout shows you a comparison between the baseline, which is the lighter color bar, and our Phase 1 recommendation, which at this point includes, again, postponing those 2 new dash routes. The impact you can see starts in fiscal year 2010-11, where we were looking at an $8.2 million shortfall. Now we're looking at a slight surplus. So it basically pushes off the shortfall for a year to 2011-12, where we would be looking at a $12.6 million shortfall even if we do postpone those 2 routes. And again, overall, it reduces the 10-year forecast shortfall from $118 million to $92 million. The last page, the recommendations from the report. I wanted to mention that there's been a lot of discussion in developing this report and the recommendations. The department worked closely with the mayor's office, the CLA, and CAO in putting the report together. The key recommendations include, as I mentioned, postponing implementation of new transit services unless there's a new funding source identified. The DOT go through, conduct a comprehensive line-by-line review, going through on a trip-by-trip basis and trying to identify where we can provide efficiencies without having to cancel any services outright. Support legislation for grant funding for capital replacement. continue to pursue FAP funding, even though we did get a significant amount of new funding through FAP. It still remains a fact that a majority of our community dash services are funded on our dime entirely. We don't get any FAP funding for, I think, 22 of the 27 community dash routes that we operate. That's fairly unique to LADOT. Most other included operators get funded for all of their services. So I'm not sure if this is necessarily the right time to go after that, but maybe if there's some new funding to the region through a tax or something like that, that we might want to pursue going after additional FAP funding. And then finally, there's a direction for CAO and DOT to report back on the feasibility of bonding for the vehicle purchase, which might smooth out some of the vehicle purchase costs and push off the shortfall for a number of additional years. That basically summarizes the key points of the report, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have.
And part of what we're doing is, plugging the holes at the moment, because that 91, even though that's better than the 118, is still a lot of money.
Still a lot on the table.
We did chat about, Mr. Parks, and I know this did not necessarily come out in the budget last year, but was the feasibility of MICLA funding for some of that possibility. Again, I know there's some issues with the interest payments and where that would come from, but I think that I want to remind DOT to come back on both of that, and also as we look at bonding from some of revenues from our Prop A and C, as we know pretty much what we're going to get relatively each year, and looking at those options for us. And similarly, as politically infeasible sometimes as it may seem, that their item number 2 and their recommendations, or I guess it would be the dot there, item number 2, which is to look at their line-by-line analysis and no elimination of existing transit routes. Do we really want them to look at which routes really are not performing at all, because we have other parts of the city that could desperately use those that will have more than 10 people take them. And as unhappy as those 10 people may be, there are other programs and projects that really we need to see. So, it may be tough for you to make some of those recommendations, but we want you to look at those very, very carefully. Okay. Yes, Mr.
Hey, James, how are you?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, question, did you look at the 1997 report?
Do I what? I'm sorry.
Did you look at the 1997 report? Somebody in 1997 did a 10-year projection. Were they right? Because we're in 2007. I just wondered, as an analyst for the department, do you look back at some of those reports?
We updated. As I mentioned, the report from, you're talking 1997.
Yeah, 10 years. This is a 10-year, I'm just saying, I think it's good to look back to see what they were thinking. Are we on course or off?
That's right, if they had the projection.
They had the projection like, where we are. But I'd say that, look at it sometimes, dig it up, if
We
you
really
would.
started looking at shortfalls. I think we were reporting back as far as 2004, where we started talking seriously about we have shortfalls that we need to consider.
Right.
With the expansion in service up and through the early 2000s, and then the increases in costs we've seen in transit, that's really where shortfalls became an issue. I think
Right.
back then, we weren't really concerned about a shortfall.
Well, anyway, I just think if we could, it always good, it's amazing what you see when you look
Yeah,
at
it
the
would be
files.
very interesting.
On that too. And I appreciate you gave credit to Mr. Parks and the mayor and our representatives are getting more out of Art Henry and the MTA. I'm sorry. And the reason I call him Art Rogers, there was a great photographer with the Los Angeles Times for many years who was very famous, and every time I see Art, I call him Art Rogers. So I apologize publicly, Art Henry, for that. With that being said, the commuter lines, how many of those commuter lines start outside the city of Los Angeles?
A number of them do. I don't know the exact number, but there are quite a few. These are primarily, a lot of them are routes that we took over from Metro back in the early,
I got that, but here's what I'm saying, with all this...
Commuter Express.
Commuter Express, et cetera. With all this being said, is there a, let's say one starts in Santa Clarita or Simi or Ventura, is there any local share given by those cities to these operations?
Traditionally, we have gone and requested funding, proportional funding from cities that we operate that are outside the city of LA. Some of them in recent years have dropped off the map because they don't have the funding available.
But I think if we do it, then they let us do it. I mean, it's just,
I agree, that's something that we ought to...
There's more firefighters working at one station in Hollywood than all in all of Beverly Hills. When Beverly Hills has a problem, obviously mutual aid works in, but I think we should step it up and let these other cities know we need your share if we could continue this service.
I
So if you
agree.
could look at that.
And I think they're coming back, we'd asked them, we hadn't reviewed the commuter express routes in how many years, Jim?
What was the question? I'm sorry.
The routes, the commuter express routes, we introduced a motion to say we needed to look at
Yes.
those routes to see, I think it's
we
over
submitted
10
it-
years,
Well,
right?
we've looked at it on an ongoing basis, but there has been a comprehensive review in several years.
And so I think that could be part of, Mr. Labange's suggestion, be part of that report back on the commuter express.
And also, I don't know if Ms. Robinson, the great general manager of the Department of Transportation with all her history and experience, would support this, but Maria, I'd like a motion to look at parking meter funds of raising rates in certain areas for monies to go to operate dash services, as they're called now, to see if there's any kind of shared partnership, or also if it's possible that neighborhood bids, business improvement districts, or neighborhood improvement districts, we're not on the map yet, but will be one day, what they could help in fund this. Everyone in every district wants to have what they call a dash on that. So if you could look at that. And finally, I want to change the name of dash, because what does dash stand for?
It originally was downtown area short hop.
Guess what I want to change it to?
Cash.
No. Talk to the CAO. The CAO would want that. I want to change it to NASH.
Nash.
Neighborhood Area Short Hop. More people are interested, and I think you have to market it. If you say Neighborhood Area Short Hop, it may work well. So there's two motions, Maria, and maybe Ms. Gurry could second
People used to
it.
the dashes, but, you know.
I understand that, but let's say neighborhood. It should be a neighborhood service, right?
Yeah.
A dash is a neighborhood service, right?
Dash kind of has dual connotation of dashing around town as opposed to that, but
I don't know, neighborhood, and then bring back the Nash, you know?
anyone can do it, you can do it.
All right, all that being said, I did
Okay.
one, right.
Mr. Rosendahl.
Well, thank you, Michael.
Time
Thank
to
you
get
both.
everybody smiling, that's always a good thing. One of the great contributions Tom makes to every meeting. Puts a smile on our face. Look, I held a meeting in my district in Mar Vista Gardens. I had hundreds of my constituents wanting a dash. We have a lot of folks that have no money that could use the dash to get to the Venice Family Clinic and to a lot of other services. We've had a group called Power that's been working with those neighborhood people to develop something. So it's unacceptable that we don't have a dash in the 11th district. It ain't all rich people in the 11th. Though we pay more taxes than anybody else, we don't get much services back. We don't have enough cops, this and that and the other. But when it comes to a dash or a NASH, we need to have one. And I'd like us to think out of the box about a creative partnership with the private sector to run these buses going forward. There are people with wealth that would be more than happy to participate in some kind of a joint venture where funding might come specifically from some folks that are philanthropic and the group in our city, the DOT, could help develop that further. So I'd like a report back thinking out of the box, not just the traditional thinking, which doesn't work anymore, out of the box of how we can get a dash in the 11th district and look at other cities where the partnerships happen, where the success has been clear. And let's come up with a strategy that I can develop among my constituents to put a dash in the 11th district. I'm not going to wait 10 more years, 20 more years, and continue to get the short end of the stick. And if we could have some futuristic planning type look into that notion and work with my staff, I'd like to have a report back on how in the 11th district we can be creative and have a public-private partnership in getting a dash NASH going.
Very good. That dash Nash, that's better there.
Mr. Parks and then Mr. Allen.
Let me just ask, when we do the line-by-line analysis in the past, I mean, is the criteria very similar to what they do at MTA?
Yes, they actually modified theirs to replicate ours.
And then you have, what is the criteria, a percentage of ridership or per miles traveled or something?
Subsidy per passenger mile and boardings per hour and fare box recovery ratio. It's an index.
Because I remember a while back, we had a big discussion about a line that went through UCLA, and we changed it several times, and we always found a reason to keep it going. But that, and I know at MTA, there's the same issue when you get ready to cut one. Those 10 people show up, and it's very, very difficult. We have one, the 44 line, that we got a reprieve for a year. So I was just wondering if we were compatible with MTA and other bus systems when we do that analysis.
Yes, and there actually, if you read the November 20th report, there's quite a bit of discussion about the rankings and how it's configured and how the lines actually score.
Now, do we have, now they have a very formalized community input with those regional deals. Do we have the similar or some kind of input from the community, the ridership, when we begin to talk about lines and evaluating their productivity?
We certainly work with the community groups. We're not set up like they are in terms of sectors, but we do work with the community groups, and certainly if we're going to look at possibly considering canceling a route or significantly modifying a route, we do have a process where we would go out and hold public hearings in that community to get their input before we would come to this committee with any recommendations.
And then let me ask you, if we analyze, if we should think about raising fares, have we evaluated what the impact could be on the FAP down the road?
We would need to take a very close look at that. We did discuss in the report some fare increase scenarios, but with this recent change in the FAP, our FAP fare units are based on our actual base fare. So if we raise our fares, that could potentially reduce how much FAP we get, and it could be a net loss of revenues to the city. So we would have to be very careful about that.
And do we have a figure on what our subsidy level is on our transportation system?
Subsidy per...
As far as what versus the fare box versus what the city's subsidy to keep it running? Because I know at MTA is something like 70%.
MTA, I think, their fare box recovery, I think, is about 24%. Yeah. It's been dropping. Ours was around 20. I think it's even dropped below that. I think in part that's because of the fare policy issues that hopefully have been addressed by no longer accepting Metro passes with route reimbursement. Even on the routes where we got reimbursed, we weren't getting a very good return. So that should significantly improve our revenues. That's something we want to keep a close eye on as well.
Now, do we have a projected goal of what we're reaching for in the sense of fare box recovery?
I think MTA is shooting for a goal of 38% or at least something closer to 30%. That's probably something that we need to be looking at as well.
Okay. And then let me ask you also on, Ms. Goulet asked you earlier about MICLA funding.
MICLA?
Is there, I don't know whether it's even possible, but is there companies that actually lease these types of equipment and buses as opposed to, because MICLA, we're talking about buying them or we're buying them with cash money. Is there a lease agreement out there where people are leasing their equipment versus buying?
We could look at leasing buses. Many years ago when we first started, we leased buses rather than bought the buses, but again, because of interest costs and things like that, it made more sense to go out and purchase. But the leasing is an option that we could look at as well. But if we could compare that possibly to bonding ourselves and buying the buses to see if one is more favorable than the other.
Because I'd like to see if we have all those kinds of categories. We can look at leasing or bonding or MICLA or cash money and just see what comes out better over. Because we're keeping these buses, 12 years or so?
Generally 12 years,
12
yes.
years. And then again, on that line-by-line analysis, I think we do need to do that as is, in a sense. And then if we should create our own percentage of farebacks recovery as it relates to what we think we should be getting, gives us a goal at least to look at ongoing.
Mr. Alcott.
Yes, we have 50 dash routes.
We have 50 total routes, Commute Express and Dash.
And as you were describing for Councilmember Parks, the primary considerations in terms of success of those routes is based on ridership and?
Generally, ridership and revenues and costs are all factored in.
Okay. The two routes that you're proposing not be implemented have a high predictability of ridership?
Yes, they're projected to score about 1.5 on our performance index.
Do all 52 routes score higher than a 1.5?
No, absolutely not. The average
How many score lower?
The average score is 1.0. Routes that are poor, there's about 9 routes now that are poor and marginal that score 0.7 or below. So you can see how they compare to a 1.5 score.
Well, I don't know what that means. I get the sense, so tell me what that means. How many riders are we talking about versus one versus the other?
It's more dependent than just riders, because routes that have more trips have more riders, but it's dependent upon how much service you're putting on the street as well. But it's safe to say that the two routes that are recommended from the DASH study are projected to have maybe twice the level of performance that some of our poor and marginal services are performing today. So in terms of ridership efficiency, things like that.
So the department is recommending that we not implement possibly two routes that are going to be twice as effective, twice as good. Projected to be twice as good, and continue at least two routes that are doing half as well.
Well, we did touch in the report that projected cuts in service are going to be likely in the very near future. What we're recommending with this report would be a more measured approach in terms of looking at how we can trim services and maybe receive additional efficiencies. Then at that point, we can reassess where we're at with regard to the services and the cost, also look at whether there's some new revenue sources that might be out there, and then at that point look at if we have to recommend cutting services. But I think we were looking at kind of a two-step approach. Certainly costs are on the horizon, cuts are on the horizon. It's just a matter of, do we do that now, or do we try to gain as much efficiency as we can through trimming service and then looking to see where we stand in terms of new revenues?
Why wouldn't we want to move forward with something that potentially will be twice as good than cutting the service? As you said, it's in the horizon anyway, then cutting service and moving forward with something that's better.
You're raising a legitimate issue. It's an issue that we raised in the report. It's a policy issue that we need to decide.
That's where I got it.
Which is eloquent. I don't know if you heard when I said earlier, what we wanted them to do was come back, because one of the proposed ones is in your district and my district as well.
Right, I know.
And this has been 2 years that they have not been implemented because the projections were so bad that, we really would be digging a deeper hole. But I think even though the department said they're not recommending cutting any projects, any particular routes, that we want them to come back within this next, and I'm going to say 45 days, with the, as they say in the recommendations, they're not recommending right now, they're going to look at each one, but I want them to come back and say why one that is 0.0, whatever that number is, should continue when there are other routes that potentially will have a greater service and potentially even, some revenue generating because of the greater, service at that area. But I think we want them to look at where it's not working and where there's a high demand.
And also, the projections of cost for the two routes were assuming purchase of new equipment, correct?
Correct.
If you move the equipment,
Yes.
The costs are going to be much less, right?
That's correct.
Did you factor that into the $1.9 million that you project would be saved?
The projections of saving assumes new buses. So if you were to implement them with existing buses, you would obviously reduce that overall cost.
By how much?
New buses would cost about $1.5 million per route, approximately.
So if there's two routes, we're already $1 million over the $1.9 million.
Two routes that have a similar amount of service, you would basically not incur that $3 million in capital replacement cost.
You might even break even or make
Well-
a little bit more because you're not buying a new bus and there's going to be more ridership, right?
Right, there'll be some revenue increase as well, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know how you get 3 million, because you're talking two routes, and you said the savings would be 1.9 million in the report, but you said a bus costs about $1.5 million. That's 3 million. To me, that's like a $3 million savings.
4 buses and a spare for each route would cost about $1.5 million per route total for 5 buses. That's the capital cost. And then we show you.
Well, I think you get my notion.
I
My notion is if we trim two dogs out there that are routes that just aren't performing, and save routes or create new routes
Understood.
with existing equipment,
Right.
the savings is going to be huge.
Yes. It would be,
And like the chair said, we probably would even generate more revenue.
there would be expect to be some Fairbucks revenue increase as well, yes. So that's something we can report back on that by the committee.
Yeah, please. I'm not ready to accept that as a recommendation, because it's penny wise and pound foolish. I mean, we're going to end up paying for fewer riders. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I understand what you're saying. It's really comes down to a policy issue of do we want to cancel existing routes to implement new routes? And
Policy meaning political, or?
He's being nice, yes.
Yeah, he's
That's what he
being
means,
nice.
that they tried.
I'll let the chair
They
take
tried
that.
They tried a few years ago, I don't know when it was, and the council did not adopt, it was, yes.
It's not an easy process. the
It's not an easy
council-
process, but we want you to come back, because you've heard from me before, and you've heard Mr. Alec and others. We want you to come back with real, true numbers, so that when we adopt something and when it goes through the budget process, which this is one of the reasons we were pushing
For all I
for
know,
Prop
the
A and
gas
C.
services that are performing the worst are in my district. I don't know. I'm just...
They're not, yeah, but, could
Glad
be.
to hear
He was
that.
being very objective. He was doing that without,
You answered that question. They're not.
so you've heard it from us to, be part of that recommendation is to come back with the ridership of those and any recommendations where we're going to have to make tough choices, which it's going to be a year of tough choices, right, Mr. Parks? Mr.
Just
Bunch?
real quick, could you also look at shortening hours? I've seen DAS buses operate and nobody on them at 6:30. I'm an early morning hiker, 6:37. Maybe you save some hours there. And also meet with the MTA because they're downsizing a lot of their lines and they want to get rid of lines. And they said they'd give us money to get rid of some lines if we converted some of their lines to. Have you ever heard that there, Phil?
Yep.
You have? Have you heard it, Mike?
Yeah, but they don't give enough. They don't.
Art, have you ever said that? Yeah, so talk with them, because they are downsizing, and maybe there's a way to make, get some additional MTA fund. Thank you, Madam
Thank you.
Chair.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, so item 6 is somewhat related because it's Prop C money. And part of the solution has been talked about, which is utilizing some of the Prop C to offset Prop A, but there's a domino effect. So,
Right.
Mike, why don't you give us your presentation?
Prop C's, my name is Mike Bueno, I'm with the Department of Transportation. Prop C is not in as dire a situation as Prop A. Prop C has a near-term problem, but long-term, it doesn't seem to have as big a deficit. In the report, we modeled 5 different alternatives. The baseline alternative includes everything that we fund today, including the assumption that we would fund money to act as match and front funding for future call for projects, safe routes to schools, transportation authorization earmark projects. The committed-only alternative only looks at what we have on the table now, only those projects through the 2007 call, through Safe T-Lou, through the safe routes to schools that we've already participated in. No other funding is set aside in the future for, explicitly, for match and front funding for those programs. And then the next 2 alternatives are alternatives that we've looked at and we've pointed to for some time about how Prop C would deal with its near-term deficit. I think in previous forecasts we've seen this, and it's as a result of the funding shortfalls in the federal and state programs where projects were delayed, and then during those 4 or 5 years that they were delayed, project construction costs and construction material costs increased abnormally high and at an abnormally high rate. And as a result, many of the projects are much more than originally planned for. These 2 alternatives are looking at the Prop 1B dollars. Prop 1B was looked at as a solution for Prop C forever, and it will resolve the near-term deficits. The 2 alternatives are, 1, to inject the funds directly into Prop C and use the Prop 1B dollars as match funding only for these projects. That alternative doesn't work very well because we would end up putting about $250 million of projects under the purview of CTC and incur all those additional constraints and rules and regulations that would probably delay projects. The second alternative is to use the Prop 1B funding to eliminate a current program in Prop C, which is street resurfacing. Prop C programs $11 million per year for street resurfacing. What we would propose in this alternative is to use the Prop 1B dollars to cover that street resurfacing cost, keep the $11 million in Prop C and use that for the projects, and that would keep those projects out of the CTC purview, and the resurfacing projects are a much easier project to get through the CTC.
So you would, sorry, I know I didn't want to interrupt earlier, but this, so I could understand that.
Yes.
So you're suggesting that, because maintenance of effort for people who supported 1B this last year was, we really want to see an increase in the amount of funds we use for the programs. Are you suggesting that we could get that 11 million from a competitive process of CTC, or we just wouldn't have $11 million for street resurfacing?
No, we would use the 1B streets and roads local funds to do,
What we'd been doing before?
yes.
But that's discretionary, we have it.
Yeah.
It's locked in, or it's not competitive? Or?
It's not locked in. We had done reports.
But what if we don't get it?
Oh, locked in from that. I thought you meant from the city's perspective. No, that's locked in.
Formula, yeah.
At least we're guaranteed $126 million over 5 years. The first installation is $65 million. We're not sure when the second installment's going to come, but it's got to come within the 5 years.
What was the money going to be used for?
The
1B money that you were proposing to use for?
It had no assigned purpose. That was what I thought you meant by locked in. We haven't locked in that amount.
Oh, okay.
What we did do was we've had meetings on it, and the recommendation from council was to look at using those funds for ongoing programs.
So it's locked in by some kind of formula, but in terms of what it's allocated for, that's
For us to decide here.
Correct.
Okay, so, just, I had the exact same questions here.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry. And the last alternative that I looked at was eliminating Prop C funding for street resurfacing altogether. And basically what we have is, under the baseline scenario, we're very short. We're about $70 million short. Under the committed only, we have lots of money. In the out years, we still have a near-term problem. The two Prop 1B alternatives are very similar, and they take care of most of our near-term problem and reduce it to, I think, a problem that we can deal with out 4 or 5 years. And then if we eliminate Prop C funding for street resurfacing, we have a lot of money.
And
Yeah,
where's,
but we don't
I was
wanna
gonna
do
say,
that.
where's street surfaces?
We don't want
Right.
to do that. We don't want to do that.
And, that was an alternative that was requested. So, what we're recommending at this point is to convene a meeting with the CLA, CAO, Public Works, and DOT to look at how best to spend the 1B dollars that we have, authorized for us now. The second recommendation is to meet with MTA to explore the possibility of, on a limited basis, billing them monthly for our projects. Because right now we bill quarterly, and that means we front fund almost a month's worth, or 6 months worth of a project cost before we get reimbursed. So on multi-million-dollar projects, we're holding a fourth of the project in front funding unnecessarily. If we could turn the bills around in 30 days the way Caltrans can, we could reduce that by a factor of 4 maybe. And then we would have more dollars going to projects and less dollars just as a banking function. The last recommendation is to meet again with Public Works and the CAO, CLA, and Metro to look at the possibility of spending ahead on the STPL. STPL is money it's federal money. It's allocated to all the cities in the county and the County of Los Angeles on the basis of population. The annual allocation is about $30 million a year. The balance is maybe $60 million right now. MTA is very anxious for somebody to step forward and help spend down this balance, and they've offered to allow cities to spend their allocations ahead of time. And the repayment would be something that's negotiable with MTA. MTA has a lot of flexibility in this pot of money. They have STPL is a small portion of the RSTP dollars, And MTA could help us step back that repayment in smaller increments. It wouldn't have to be all done within a year or 2 or 3 years. And that would help us considerably. And when we're looking at alternatives that are financing, bond financing or some kind of financing instrument, this is a good way to do it because we're not charged the interest. MTA only promises to pay back those cities on a dollar-for-dollar basis without inflation. So we borrow $30 million, we repay $30 million sometime in the future. You can't get a deal like that anywhere else. So we've offered this up. We've proposed this many times before. Street Services has a problem with it. At least one of the problems is the repayment, and I think we need to get Street Services and Metro and DOT at the table to talk about how we can make that repayment work for all of us, because this is just too good a deal to let go.
Well, and I know next week I'm on our all-day transportation discussion on Tuesday. We're going to have a presentation not only by DOT but by Street Services and the funds that are used, because we know that transportation is impacted by streets. And I think by all of our questions, you see that taking away the money from the Street Services is not very, popular here.
Smart.
And so, yeah. And I know in your recommendations, it doesn't say remove them. What it does say is get together and figure out, which we've asked, I think, in previous motions, about how we're going to utilize that Prop 1B and see how we leverage it to the fullest extent, and to, I think, ensure the voters that they're getting something, for the fact that they voted for 1B and not supplanting. And I know you're coming from a perspective of DOT, so I understand that from that one. I know that the couple of proposals to Metro, I'm not sure if Art can respond to those, but we're very interested in Metro looking, kind of looking outside the box and trying to be creative, because we are a big part of your system, and the ability for not only the monthly, but also taking advantage of your offer, I think, is something we would like to do. So, as I saw in your recommendations, it's really asking you to go back with the teams and pursue some of the options here discussed, other than taking the money away from Street Services, to be creative and working with Metro and the spend ahead, and come with a big picture of what 1B is going to do. So we can make, it may be that we trim some, I don't know, but we want to make an educated decision about where that 1B is going to go, and it fits into our whole concept of a strategic plan that says we're prioritizing what it is we want to fund, and that includes all levels there. So one question on this, there was one of the strains on Prop C is the undergrounding of the utilities.
Yes.
Is there any DDBP ability, and they're asking for a rate increase to address particularly infrastructure kinds of things. What percentage of that undergrounding, is that a huge amount that could be, talked about with the Department of Water and Power?
It is a large amount on some projects. Most of the projects right now are done on the existing right-of-way and don't involve relocation of utilities. I think it will become a larger problem in the future as we've basically picked the low-hanging fruit, those projects where we can do something within the existing right-of-way. It's going to be more difficult when we start expanding outside the right-of-way. We'll be moving things around a lot more, I think. It's an issue that we need to work through. I think the agreement was made on behalf of part of the city. And
so maybe we'll add to your recommendations, because colleagues, my recommendation is going to be that we approve the DOT recommendations to come back with, but that you add working with Department of Water and Power on that particular item, and that you'd be coming back in 45 days with kind of a report back with the task force that's looking at 1B monies. Mr. LaBonge.
Yeah, who do you talk with at Water and Power?
I don't know. This was a deal that...
I understand. Talk to Randy Howard. Start with Randy Howard. He knows all about that. And when I look at you in your report, and I think of these other cities, Long Beach, Pasadena, et cetera, which are larger, not small cities, and because you talk, absolutely wouldn't support taking money away from street paving. Street paving is the number one issue next to one's public safety. as far as that. They're bothered by traffic. But I said to myself, what if the Board of Public Works was expanded to 7 and Transportation Department moved into the Board of Public Works? What if there was more cooperation internally? They just repaved a street I was on today called Hyperion. It's not in my district, between Sunset and Effie, and there's no double yellow line like there is on the southern part of the street, which is narrower, and it's just wide open. The paint didn't come on after it was paved. Cooperation. I don't see any writing down Effie and Sunset Boulevard on Hyperion. They need a double line or some demarcation in there. I'm just thinking there needs to be more cooperation in this. How big is our budget, Mr. Park? $6 billion operation? $6.5 billion operation, because you're all dedicated. And, you work real hard for the team, and you're an energized team, DOT, but I almost think to see some of the roadblocks you get are internally. And I would fight for street services as I would fight for LA DOT, but I think we're all working for the same people. The same people are paying the same wages, so we need to break that ice for you. There should be a Public Works Commissioner, and I'm sure they listen to this, and they're very proactive in a way to help and solve these roadblocks that shouldn't be there. We had a power outage in the Hollywood Hills for multiple days. We got a brand-new street. They repaved it, but they couldn't find the vault where the power was underneath it because of sometimes this lack of, communication and accident. That's what the citizens get most frustrated by. So when I hear that from you, Michael, I want to join your side and help you break the ice, make relationships. I would like, I don't know if anybody from the CAO's office is here who looks and oversees. Who's for the CAO's office? Right here. The Department of Transportation. Do you need more power? Do you need more cooperation? What does Long Beach do? What does Pasadena do? They're pretty large cities. What does Glendale do? Is the person that, as you just spoke of, I'm saying, what would the representative of that city do if he had this problem? He probably has it under his control to solve the problem. Do you hear what I was saying? So that's my thought. I know you can't do anything out. I got to do something about it, but I wanted to lay it out there. Thank you very much.
And they have, one of the issues as we came through Safety Lou, which went to both, we've really been, again, there was a task force set up between DOT and Public Works to make sure that we were working together on that. So we hope that
Do your
continues. Mr.
commissions
Parks?
ever meet? Maybe they could meet. The Transportation Commission and the Public Works Commission could meet sometime, just to get to know each other and know the important roles it is, because it is key.
Mr. Parks?
Let me ask, has Metro ever looked at this issue of the billing? Do you know?
I think it's been discussed before, but
We offered up that proposal maybe 4 years ago on projects that were whose construction budget was over $1 million, and MTA agreed with that, and I think 12 projects were billed on a monthly basis then.
So what happened? The system fell out after that?
We had an agreement only on those 12. And so
their issue primarily is that they don't have the staff to do that for every single project. So it was a struggle to get them to agree to do those, but we'll continue to talk to them and push.
I don't know there was a struggle, but they agreed to do the 12. And, I think we're not asking them to bill, we're not asking to bill every project that we have on a monthly basis, just those where the construction budget is significantly large, so that there is a savings. On smaller projects, we budget the entire project cost anyway, and so there's no savings there for us. But on the big projects, we could save some of the money that we hold.
Let me ask Maria, if we could get with DOT and put together a motion for MTA, and I can take over there and ask them to look at that formally.
That'd be great.
I think last time we may have done it administratively.
But it may be something that you can come up with a dollar figure projects over a certain amount, so that we can have something and then I think the figures in your report on that third paragraph is pretty significant when you look at the amount of money that can be saved on the front end, that we're tying up $5 million versus 1.7, I think speaks for itself. But if we can do something, I appreciate it.
You're continuing, right?
Yeah, we can come back. Okay, so I think that's the questions, what, in the next 45 days then, both of you all have work to do, but we're adopting your recommendations with a few changes on yours and yours too, Mike, so that'll be the order. So do we hold them? How do we
clarify here, You approve going with recommendations of the DOT with the additional men to meet with DWP, report back in regard to the underground coordination. Is that what you're intention?
And for them to look at setting up a threshold for dollar amounts for those that would be on the monthly reimbursement with Metro.
We could set that up as an instruction for them to report back.
Okay.
While we send the rest to
Great.
council.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. I know this has been a long time coming. I think when I first became chair of transportation, we had that first awful report that was scary, and it's a little bit better. It's still scary.
Take a step at a time.
But I think we're at that pinnacle point in which we can make some changes and make some decisions, so that you're not in this kind of doom and gloom situation and think there's no way out. So we want to help that. So thank you very much for all your work on that.
Madam Chair, just to clarify on item 5, is that being held in committee, or this was the
No, I think
directly to?
On item 5, I think, I guess you're also supposed to report back in 45 days. So that one I think we would hold here.
Very good.
Okay, thank you.
We're holding both, right?
And with that, seeing no other public comment cards, meeting is adjourned. So we can get ready.